There's Dr. Patino there in his office, back from a little mini vacation. You probably noticed that we were not here last week on a live show, but we are back now. We were chatting before the show. Doctor had a very good vacation, and I'm glad. But in the meantime, a week has gone by from what we talked about before the shooting in Uvalde. And it seems that with all the other things going on in the world, gas prices, in particular the January 6th committees, that so much of the tragedy and the effects of the event have kind of just disappeared. Is that just because people are stupid? Don't have a, it's that whole, we don't, shiny object thing? Or is it a deeper psychological issue of maybe pushing away the pain of that? What's your take on this?
Well, it's multifaceted, uh, and I have mixed feelings about it, and I'll try to kind of explain to you my view of what it means, right? Because we can take a very cynical approach to this, and we can say, well, this is what always happens, right? When in the United States, we get a mass shooting, a lot of people die, there's a big uproar, media is all over the place 24/7, for about a week, 4 to 7 days, and then things start to disappear, right, into the next shiny object. But I think that that's a simplistic view of this, right? Because if we are to understand how we react to trauma, and by the way, let me say this. I'm actually, to some degree, thankful that the media is out of Uvalde for the most part because people need time and space to grieve. You see, what happened in Uvalde is a very personal, intimate issue that to some degree gets exploited at times for sociological, political, and economic reasons. So I've said that already. But they need time, they need intimacy, they need to deal with their emotions and feelings and frustrations and anger and sadness that for most of us is very difficult to understand because that's a one in a lifetime society issue, right? It's not, it's like a plane crash. We talked about
Mm,
that before. But when it comes to trauma, there is a natural and actually a biological tendency to remove yourself from the trauma so you can go on with your life, especially if it was not affecting you directly. That is one part. Another one is that is something we don't talk very much about, but we humans, we are short-term memory animals.
mm,
Our survival doesn't require a lot of long-term memory, but short-term memory is indispensable when it comes to survival, right? So when it comes to negative issues and traumatic issues, we internalize them very quickly and we forget them until the next time they happen, right? So, how do we know that we're short term memory animals? We know that because we almost become incapacitated when we get demented, right?
mm.
When you get Alzheimer's or you get dementia for other reasons, the first thing that goes away is your short term memory. So, if you don't have short term memory, it's very difficult to survive and you're in
And isn't it
significant danger.
And isn't it very common that their long-term memory remains, and they'll talk about things in the past, they just can't remember what a toothbrush is?
Yeah, and we were talking about dementia. That's a symptom that we call confabulation. Confabulation means that you utilize your long term memory. Like you ask somebody, "How are you feeling today?" What did you do this morning? And they will say, uh, "I remember, in 1936, I was having breakfast with some friends." They utilize the long term memory to reorient themselves, and they leave alone the short term memory.
Mm,
But short term memory is so essential that if you don't have it, you get lost, right? You walked out of the house and you don't know how to get back. So we don't pay enough attention to it until we lose it, right?
mm.
So that's one of the reasons people tend to move away very quickly, especially from traumatic situations, especially except those who are in the midst of the grieving, right? Another reason is a psychological reason that we move to the next most threatening thing to our survival or well being, right? So For most of us, what happened in Uvalde was not a survival issue for ourselves. It's a worry that it can happen in the
Mm,
future. But when you hit gasoline at $6 a gallon, and there are no tampons, and there's no milk for the baby, that's survival stuff. So you can get distracted from the immediate threats, but not for very long. Okay,
mm.
so people will move away.
It's interesting you said that at the gun place where I work, our classes are completely full, especially our concealed carry classes. People responding, like you said, thinking an additional threat's going to occur, and they're coming to us, unfortunately, in groves. And I say unfortunately because I don't like people coming for this type of training out of fear, but that fear definitely does sell. Um, so in the short term memory, they remember what's going on or remember have that warning. But as you said, it gets very easily distracted. Is that part of the reason why the news cycle is the way it is? So that they're always.
You know,
And I know marketing is. I have an MBA. We studied all that, how to
yeah.
affect people and move them along. But the news cycle seems to be doing that to a large extent as well.
Well, I do have to say, I'm not a specialist in media, right? But I'm an observant of media. I consume media. I consume marketing in media. So if I look at the patterns, right? At the end of the day, in a capitalistic society, media is also part of the capitalistic process, right? So at the end of the day, for media to survive, they have to sell. They're selling something. And they sell it two different ways. One is they sell to the one who pays for commercials, right? And then they sell to people to buy the commercial, right? So you have a number of different clients. So there is a point in where the attention of the American public starts going down, and it's no longer a good business. Even though I have to tell you, because I know people that work in media and that work for networks, and they have their hearts in the right place. When they go to Uvalde or they go to New York State, the shooting over there, they're really invested, okay, on what they're talking about. But that doesn't mean that they're calling the shots, right?
Mm.
So I think it is as frustrating for people in the ground doing the news, right, to see that this kind of disappears, right? And I've heard it from them, and I think that to a high degree they don't have control over the process, right? Meaning the marketing, the attention of the public. There's a lot of competition for views, right? I mean, we see it in our business of podcasting, right? There's a lot of competition for views. So we have to be realistic, okay? That there's not like a puppet master managing things out there, but there's in the media world there is a following of viewers, okay? Wherever the viewers go, the media goes, right? Unfortunately, and we talked a lot about this before, bad news sell a lot better than good news,
Oh yeah.
right? I mean, if tomorrow, which is not going to happen, you know, gasoline goes down to 250 a gallon and there's plenty of milk and all of that stuff, inflation goes down to 3%. Uh, we're going to hear for about half a day and it's going to go away. But I have to tell you, every time that I turn the TV, I'm hearing about inflation, gasoline prices, what is not there.
Mm.
I don't hear anybody talking about what's there. So the same thing happens in Uvalde, right? Now, what concerns me about Uvalde is that in some circles, especially in the political arena, Uvalde becomes a flag for different positions, right? Everybody wants to utilize the crisis as a way to express their wishes for change,
It's a
right?
leverage point for their specific viewpoint.
Exactly. But at the end of the day, I mean, the last time I've checked, I think there's a little bill in Congress that is going to do almost nothing. And everybody is going to say, well, we're pro gun control, we pro rights of the gun owners, and go into the election in November and use it as a flag, right?
Mm.
So the question is, purpose. How is that good for the people of the United States, not just the people of Uvalde, right? And you and I were going over a paper that we hope to publish soon, right, where we talk about some of those things in terms of how situations like this gets disconnected from the long term survival. Meaning, what are the real risks that we having to deal with, and you get to see in the classes in terms of training people to use guns and all of that, the insecurity of people
Mm.
that they're going into getting a gun for all the wrong reasons.
Oh, absolutely. And they think the gun's going to solve those problems instead of understanding it's a tool for something very specific, and something very rare, at least in a self-defense situation. Yeah, it's an interesting psychology. My job is to try to get them to understand that, but it's an uphill battle for sure.
Well, I mean, and I'm sure that the whole process, and you correct me if I'm wrong, is directed toward safe ownership of guns,
Yes.
is directed toward responsible ownership of guns, respect to guns, right? Is not, I'm going to teach you how to shoot people, right?
Yes, and actually, I have to say that it's kind of what I've done in the last couple months. We've written our entire curricula and looked at our instructor staff and basically changed that because quite literally, yeah, people were teaching in classes day one. People have never touched a firearm before, only there to do it for recreational reasons, and talking about shooting somebody in the face in a self-defense situation. I was like, no, it's all about safety. It's about understanding firearms as they are, enjoying it as the martial art, Western martial art that it is. And if they want to go down that road much later in self defense, after they have a basic, I always liken it to driver's ed, right? We're not going to tell them what race to run in. And, we want them just to learn how to drive the car safely. And then they can decide where they want to go after that.
Yeah, and maybe, down the road we may get a little more into me learning more about what you do, right?
Sure.
Because I usually have to deal with the consequences of guns. Uh, why? Because I have to deal with suicide. I have to deal with people killing other people. I have to deal with mental illness, aggression, toxic masculinity, you know, victims of violence, all of that stuff. That's what I do. So I see the consequence. But what I don't see, and this includes Uvalde too, is the process, the movie that led to, right? And I think that I think that there's where we are missing the point, which is how do we get from point A to point B, and how little we invest on understanding that process, right? Let me give an
Mm,
example. I was looking at the new legislation, and and by definition, I'm an emergency psychiatrist, and I work with teenagers, right? So I deal with all of the acute suicidality, homicidality, acute psychosis, all of those things. And I see that they're going to invest like $20 billion on psychiatric emergency mental health. And I don't think that the people who are talking about this really understand what they're talking about.
mm,
I mean, legislative say we're going to throw some money at the problem, okay? And everybody talks about this crisis of mental health in adolescence, which is probably one of the issues that was dealt with in Uvalde, without paying attention to the crisis has been there for 50 years. This is not something that started this year with the shooting in Uvalde, right? Uh, Fortunately, in Arizona, I do have to say this: we're not fully funded, but we like number five in terms of care for teens and kids in behavioral
mm.
health. Now, we
Wow.
didn't. When I started in psychiatry, we were like number 40, right? So there's been a whole movement that has moved toward things getting better. So we're not the worst in the country, but we're getting up there in terms of our ability to deal with this. We're far from perfect. But I think that there is room for people to understand process and identify people early. And we talked about this in the other program. Like, can we start paying attention to aggression in children?
Mm,
Can we do something about it? Can we monitor it? Right. So all of those things become essential on trying to facilitate change. But I think that that needs to go parallel if we're going to have guns in this country, we have like 400 million of them right now.
More than
So,
people. Yep.
yeah, we have more guns than people. So, at least can we embark in a process of understanding both sides that would include the people that work in the gun stuff with a clear value based purpose, right? That we understand each other, we stop pointing fingers at each other because that doesn't help anybody. I mean, we talk about airplanes crashing, right? And how rare it is nowadays to hear about plane crashes when it wasn't as unusual, even though it's extremely rare, which
Mhm.
mass shootings are extremely rare in comparison to kids shooting themselves with guns at home, right? But we pay a lot more attention to the event than the process of crisis that we've been dealing for a long time. And we need to get in the same page of what is the purpose of doing what we're doing besides money, right? And we kind of talk in the article about this, which is okay. So if prevention was a good business, we would all be doing it,
Oh, absolutely.
right? So I don't think we've done a very good job of prevention in mental health. I don't think we've done a very good job of prevention in the gun side, right? So can we do it together? Is that possible?
Ah, geez, I think it might be. But that's gonna. It's definitely an uphill battle. It's been made a zero sum game. Um, so many of the Second Amendment people, if you have any question about it whatsoever, it's out the window. There's a gentleman, Tim Kennedy, who's a former Special Forces guy, does a lot of stuff. Former MMA fighter, worked for 511 Tactical, I believe, and does a bunch of other things. And I have a friend who worshipped the guy because hey, he's a badass. Went and shot at people until one day when he was being interviewed, and he said, "Yeah, I don't think everyone should have guns," and that was it. So one single word, one single comment, that guy was now persona non grata in my friend's life because for them it is an all or something. They don't understand the concept that you and I have discussed that rights are not, you know,
Abs-
absolute. We as a society make a social contract. We pass laws then that basically take away some of those rights, or at least the edges of it, so that we can live in a functional society. I always mention to people that yelling fire in a theater, that is an infringement of your First Amendment rights. However, as a society, we said, you know what, that's probably a good thing for all of us. For them, the gun thing, it's any infringement or any control over it whatsoever is an infringement, and they just kind of go ballistic. It's just it's that again, we talked about maturity level. It's not even a logical discussion. It's just a absolute no, and then they throw a little tantrum about it. Typically,
but
at least
you
that's
see,
been my experience.
yeah, and I see it all the time. But from a psychiatric perspective, right? When you tell me those things, what is going on in my mind? I'm thinking, why so much fear? Why
Yeah.
so much insecurity? Why do you have to go into a corner position, right, to defend something that gives you nothing? I mean,
Yeah.
and you and I talked about this in terms of okay, so if you're not responsible for using your guns, you can have all the rights you want, but if you shoot someone, even if it's in self-defense, it's a problem.
Yep, absolutely huge issue. Civil, you have criminal issues, civil issues. We discuss it all the time. I tell people constantly, you have less than a 1% chance of ever being in a lethal force encounter, but a 99+% chance of screwing it up and losing everything you've ever had.
and 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 again, as a psychiatrist, I have to say, and the purpose is,
Yeah.
well, psychiatrically speaking, in a lot of those cases, and we're going to connect with toxic masculinity, is like somebody trying to castrate you, right?
Yes. Takes away their
Uh,
power.
exactly. So you don't want to show vulnerability when in reality, and it's interesting because I was talking to my students because we have some violent people in the hospital recently, and we were talking about how do you handle um, somebody threatening you in your office, right? And they said, well, what if one of the students asked, what if somebody comes into my office with a gun, right? And I had to tell him, listen, if somebody comes into your office with a gun, the first thing you want to do is you should try to keep yourself alive, right?
Hmm.
That is
Absolutely.
number one.
Don't get dead. That's always rule number one in self-defense.
Exactly. Don't get
Everything
dead.
else is secondary.
Exactly. So then you have to say, okay, so how? How do I go about doing that? And I said, well, you do certain things, you know. Number one, you have to understand that at that moment, that person has all the power. And you have to allow them to have all the power. The moment that you become boisterous and aggressive and tell them, how dare you do this, you don't know who I am, blah, 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 you're going to get shot, right? You don't look at their eyes because animals threaten each other by looking at their eyes. You become humble. Keep your head down. Don't look at their eyes. Let them know that they're in control. Okay.
Even bring your hand. Oh, please don't shoot me. It looks submissive, but actually prepares you to potentially defend or attack if you need to.
Exactly. And also let them know that you're a human being, right? That your life has value, right? Uh, so most men and most male students that I've dealt with get into this question of maybe I should be fighting this guy, right? I said, no, you don't do that. And I'm sure that when you're teaching self defense, you get into some of those issues, right? In
Yeah, but it's
terms,
very specific to the environment. If you're sitting behind your desk like you are right now and someone comes in the room, there's no fighting going on. You're just yeah, until the person gets close to you or what. I mean, there's all sorts of contextual issues that have to be dealt with and tactical issues that again, that's more the training than anything else. The actual physical aspect is the kind of the icing on top. The rest of it's again not getting dead, putting yourself in the right position, de-escalation, verbal skills, and really using all the skills to not get in that situation in the first place is really ideal. And then,
mhm,
yes, it's nice to have one or two things that, God forbid, um, you could use if you needed to. It's funny you said that. I had a friend of mine who did have a gun pointed at him once, and the guy was very angry, and the words he used was, "Please don't murder me." And the guy stopped. He goes, "I was going to murder you. I was just going to shoot you." And it changed everything because he made himself a human and said, "No, you're
mhm,
murdering me." And it really changed it stopped the guy in his tracks. It was very interesting, and he did end up talking the guy down. It was a drug incident, and
mhm,
it was very interesting that he used that specific word, and that got the response.
mhm. But
That
you see,
humanization.
when I take that into toxic masculinity, right, and especially when you have alcohol and drugs involved,
Mm,
and somebody's got a gun, that's a terribly combination, right? Because there's going to be a need for everybody to determine who's the alpha male
yep.
in the situation, right? And that's the most destructive, dangerous situation you can be in. Right?
I will say some of the most dangerous people I know very submissive at times because again it's about tactics and the right time. Aggression's to be applied when it's necessary, otherwise there's no point. People get hurt. I have people in my classes all the time say, "So what kind of gun do you carry?" And I tell them I don't. They're like, "Wait a minute, you're a firearms instructor." I said, "Yeah, I know, I don't carry a gun. I have other options. Run away, don't get in the problem in the first place." um, it shocks them a lot. They find it a little bit weird, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I somebody told me once, and it has to do with self protection. And I think we mentioned in one of the programs before, and we were talking about road rage, right? Because we see a lot of that, and some people carry their guns in their cars, right? And you can destroy your life in shooting someone because they cut in front of you, right? And he was telling me, it is interesting to see how quickly some men react, and some women nowadays too, you know, to somebody taking half a second out of their lives, right?
Yep.
It's like you're driving your car and that you become terribly powerful and aggressive because you're behind that thing, right? But even if somebody cuts in front of you, and that made me think a lot because I used to get very upset when somebody was cutting in front of me. It made me think, let him go. Let him go. Why? do you want to get in the middle of this?
Hmm.
Which kind of brings me to a situation that I think we're going to continue hearing about, and it has to do with fear, right? And the Uvalde response from the police in terms of 40 minutes.
Oh yeah.
We're talking the article about it. What is your take on that?
Whew, that's a tough one. There's a couple different things. Individually, um, I can't speak to that other than a lot of police officers that I've met recently have a very different view of protect and serve. One, um, and that I think is to the individual officer as a policy in the department. That's a different thing.
Mhm.
And a lot of these guys won't because they're afraid of being sued or doing the wrong thing. Won't take action until a supervisor tells them to do so. So there's a combination of things. But I think it was the border patrol agent, a federal agent, who walked in and said, "Look, I don't care what anyone's saying. I'm going to go take care of this." And that's a tough one. I'm not in anyone's shoes. I can't judge, but it seems to me as we again, and by the way, the article we're mentioning will hopefully here be soon be published in Latino Rebels
Mhm.
online magazine. We've had multiple articles published there. At least you have. Um, that will discuss some of these things. But on an individual level, I don't understand. I think if you're going to have that job, and we mentioned it, to protect and serve, that's what you do. If you're going to strap a gun on and body armor and all the other kit, and you hear people being hurt, your job is to run toward that area, neutralize the threat, and get people out. I don't know why that occurred. I don't know if it's because of a policy. I don't know it's because of individual fear. I don't know why. That would be an interesting one to me. I would like to interview those guys and find out what was your decision making, because a lot of the people I know would have not hesitated one moment to run toward that fire. Yeah.
Exactly. Now, something that I wonder, over the last 4 or 5 years, there's been a lot of bad mouthing of the police.
Mm.
Okay. And again, a zero sum game. If you police, you're bad. Which in reality, I mean, it's like if you tell me if I'm a bad psychiatrist, every psychiatrist is bad, right? It doesn't work like that.
It does not. It does not. But
So,
it's easy. It's easier because people are intellectually lazy. They want a quick snap. I for the police or against the police instead of the police have their job and they're good ones and bad ones, and the vast majority are in the middle and they do the right thing.
yeah, but we went as far as talking about defunding the police. Remember
Yeah, quite
that big
literally.
movement, which I found kind of intellectually lazy, right? I mean, to say the solution to the problem is to destroy the police. Okay,
Hmm.
yeah. I mean, I can tell you that most people in the United States want to have the police. So it is not a good political flag to be carrying with you. But I do think that it was demoralizing for the police.
Oh, very much so.
So I wonder to what extent all of this has led to the police saying, do I want to give my life for all these thankless people?
I think that is a factor. I know here in Phoenix, I think publicly they've said like we're down 200 or 300 police. I've heard some retired police officers I know say no, we're down 800, um, which I thought was pretty shocking. But like anything from an economic standpoint, if there's a demand and a need for that service, it will be filled. Now, there's an opportunity to fill it with a different kind of people, maybe a better type of person, better trained. We don't know, but that's an interesting thing. I'm not really sure where that's going to go.
Yeah, but I do believe that it takes us into the idea of values, right?
Mhm.
That we have a contract of values that include the police. Now, I deal with the police all the time because they bring people to the hospital, because they come and interview people, because uh, very often they're doing social work stuff, right? That they're not trained to do, but they do it anyway. And I have to tell you, I would say that 99% of the police that I come across with are good people with good values. They don't
Mhm.
wake up in the morning saying, who am I going to hurt today? Okay. Now, I'm not saying that they're not bad police people. I'm not saying that there are no racist people, for God's sake. I'm Hispanic. I've had to deal with that when I was younger, in terms of being stopped because I'm driving a nice car and look Mexican, right? So those kinds of things, not as bad as probably happens to African American people, but I have had to deal with that. So but that is an exception, okay, not the rule. Now, I do have to say that in some areas of the country, maybe more of a rule than an exception, right?
Hmm.
But it's not a general rule for the whole world. And we need to stop making policy for the exceptions. We need to straighten the policy for the rule and look into how do we solve the problem of the exception. But we want to do it backwards. We want to say because somebody gets killed, we have to get rid of all the rules we had before and create new ones. Well, good luck.
Hmm.
You know, how, I mean, that is not going to happen.
Isn't
But
that called tyranny of the minority? I believe conceptually. Yeah,
yeah, that is material for another program.
that is very much so. Well, once again, appreciate your input, Doctor. The half hour's gone by quickly. Got me talking more than usual. Okay, I got you on that one, and hopefully it'll yeah, spark some interest. Of course, everybody out there, please listen, share, and of course subscribe. And we'll see you again next week.
Thank you. We'll see you next week. Thank you.
Take care.